Good morning. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I'm also, like Ian, I'm a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber, and I'm grateful for the support from Komen. I'm a recipient of a Career Catalyst Award, which helps support studies of resistance to therapies that Ian alluded to before that I do in my lab. But I'm not going to talk about those resistance studies today. Instead, I wanted to talk about a new program, a new project that we've been working on for the last couple of years called the Metastatic Breast Cancer Project. And the idea here is to develop a project where we can partner directly with patients to accelerate our understanding of metastatic breast cancer. We heard from Ian earlier today that immunotherapy works in some patients, but not in all patients. And that's really true of many of our cancer therapies, that that these drugs may work particularly well in a subgroup of people, but not in everyone. And in many cases, we don't know who they will work in or who they won't work in, or how to identify which drug is appropriate for which patient. And that's the idea behind precision medicine, is that if we could develop tools and techniques to identify for every patient's tumor what were the right drugs to use and what were the drugs to avoid, we might be able to make a far greater impact in cancer therapy. And so our ultimate goal in patients with metastatic breast cancer, and really all cancer, is to understand at the individual level what drives every person's breast cancer, so that we can interpret the patient's cancer genome, the genes and the molecular defects in their tumor, identify the optimal treatments, and then anticipate and preempt resistance before it occurs. That's what we want to be able to do for every single patient. And as Ian just showed you, and as we've heard so much in the news, there's been a lot of progress, but we are still not at that goal. There's still a lot of work to be done. And so one of the things that it will take to get there is really being able to collect tumor samples and medical records from as many patients as possible, really to characterize the tumors from thousands of patients, match it to their medical records, understand why some people are responding and not responding to drugs, to be able to generate a really deep understanding of how this works. And so we do that kind of work at Dana-Farber. Patients who, if any of you are patients at Dana-Farber, you may have signed consent forms that give us permission to look at your tumor sample and study it and understand what's going on and how drugs might be working or not working in those tumors. But that's only, the patients who come to Dana-Farber are only a small fraction of all of the patients in the United States who have metastatic breast cancer. So one of the things that we think has been slowing down this type of research is that the vast majority of cancer patients in the United States don't get their care at large academic medical centers that do these kinds of research. Only 5% or fewer of adults with cancer in the US participate in clinical trials. And even in those clinical trials, tissue samples are not always studied to understand why some tumors shrunk and why some tumors didn't. And if you just look at where people get their care in the United States, the vast majority of patients, up to 85% by some measures, are treated in community settings. And they go to the community settings and they get great care in the community settings, and their tumors might be stored and put in the pathology department, but no one ever then goes back to those pathology departments and actually studies the tumor to see, to add to this body of knowledge that we have to learn why, how drugs might work better. And so the reason that we're not able to study tumors from patients across the country is largely because no one's ever asked. No one's ever gone to those patients who are treated in community centers and said, can we use your tissue to add to a larger study to be able to try and make these advances more quickly? And so a couple of years ago, we were thinking about this problem, and we realized that in today's day and age, in the age of social media and organized patients and advocacy organizations like Komen, that we might have an opportunity to go and reach out directly to patients and ask them to partner with us in an approach where we might be able to, instead of trying to go to each individual institution and partnering on this big multi-institutional research project, to allow patients to direct this type of research effort and unlock all of the information that is uniquely theirs, their tumor samples, their saliva samples, their clinical information, and share this in some large study that's not affiliated with any one institution, but it's really patient-focused. And so in late 2014, early 2015, we started going around and talking to people about this idea. We talked to a number of patients, we talked to a number of patient advocates, and we said, if we were to put out this idea that patients should be empowered to share their information and share their tumor samples and pool all their data for one large study that we can learn from, would you be interested? And a number of patients and a number of advocacy organizations thought it was a good idea, and they gave us a lot of really helpful advice about how we might do this and what the right messaging would be and what the approach should be. And with a lot of people's help, we decided to put this project together. We called it the Metastatic Breast Cancer Project, and we built a website that we then launched in late 2015. And this is the website. It's at mbcproject.org. And as you can see, any patient with metastatic breast cancer can go here, and it says, help transform our understanding of metastatic breast cancer. And as you read through the website, you'll see that it shows how patients really are the key to helping unlock all of this information that's stored in their local hospitals, but could really empower research. And so it says your tumor and your medical record could unlock discoveries, and asks patients to become part of a research movement and have a direct impact on the future, and shows how you can participate. And so this was an experiment. We didn't know if people would sign up. We didn't know if large numbers of patients with metastatic breast cancer would buy into this idea, but it turns out many patients do. And so in about 16 months since we launched in October 2015, over 3,400 women and men with metastatic breast cancer have signed up. And you can see that these are patients from all over the country, all 50 states. We have patients outside the country as well. We have many patients in Canada and some in other countries. This is largely US based, but we've really gotten a great response from all around the country. So what do? Once patients sign up, we've asked for their name and their email address, and to tell us that they have metastatic breast cancer and that they're willing to potentially answer more questions and maybe even share their tumor samples and their saliva samples. So what we do is we then go through the following steps. We send everyone who signs up an online consent form, and that consent form asks for permission for us to obtain and analyze their tumor, their saliva, sometimes their blood, and their medical records. And if they sign the consent form, we send them a little box that has a vial in it that they can spit in and send back. We call their local doctors and we ask for copies of their medical records, which are faxed or mailed to us. We read the medical records, we find out where their tumor tissue is stored. And then we call the local pathology departments and ask for a portion of that tumor tissue, not the entire piece, but a few slides that we can then look at and analyze. And then we take all of this to our laboratory where we do genetic and molecular analysis on the tumor and on the saliva. And then we try and match all this data together. So the goal is to create this very big database of molecular, genetic, and clinical information where we can look for patterns. And so this is the idea of big data where we can look for patterns. And the more and more patients we get in here, we can see what genetic features, what drug combinations, and what outcomes might all go together. And then importantly, we take this information and we report it back in aggregate, and we share the data in publicly accessible databases. So because patients are sharing their information, we don't want to just use it for ourselves, but we want to make sure that every researcher can use this. So this all goes in a repository with updates every 6 months for other researchers to be able to learn from. So I want to show you how enrollment has gone over the last year and a half or so. So the blue line are people who have, all those 3,400 people you saw on the map who have signed up for the project. And a couple of interesting things we've noticed. You can see that it's not a smooth line. You have, let's see if my mouse works here. You can see that it's not a smooth line here. I don't know if this works.
That's a clicker for the advancing.
Oh, okay. So we launched here in October with our advocacy partners, and you can see a lot of people signed up. About 800 people signed up in a really short period of time. But then it leveled off around Thanksgiving time and New Year's of 2015. And then all of a sudden, on January 3rd or 4th of 2016, we got this huge jump in signups. And we didn't do anything. We weren't out there advertising or trying to get people to sign up. And we tried to figure out why people had suddenly started signing up in January. And it turns out that there were a number of patients who were participating in the program who went onto Facebook and Twitter and started telling people they knew about the project. And this was almost entirely driven by patients recruiting other patients to the study. The same thing happened a month later in February. A single patient went and posted on her Facebook page and said, I'm doing this project, the Metastatic Breast Cancer Project. It was really easy. I think it's really important. I think you should check it out. And 300 people signed up in one day. And really ever since then, you can see there's been a steady increase, and I would say most of these signups have been patient-driven, other patients telling other patients about this project. We started sending out the consent forms in January, and you can see now more than 2,000 people have signed the consent form to participate. And we started sending out saliva kits in March, and now we have more than 1,200 saliva kits that we have in the lab from patients who have sent them in. I told you earlier that 85% of patients are getting cared for in the community and not in big academic medical centers, and that's reflected in the people who are participating in this study. So you can see here that there are a few institutions, a few big academic institutions where we have many participants. So 5 institutions where more than 40 patients are getting their care for a total of 220 patients. But the vast majority of people who have signed up for the study are getting cared for in centers where they're the only patient who's participating in the study. So instead of this being a study jointly between 1 or 2 or 3 institutions, right now we have 992 different institutions that are sharing where patients are participating in the study. So I think this really is some proof that this is really allowing us to reach into the community in ways that the traditional studies don't. Once patients have signed up, we ask them to complete a survey about themselves. And so the survey asks 16 questions, patient-reported, about their experience with metastatic breast cancer, what type of cancer they have, treatments they've received, maybe treatments that have worked really well, some information about demographics. And you get varying responses to surveys when you conduct survey research. And what was amazing here is that 95% of the 3,400 people who've signed up for the study have answered the questions, even though it's optional. And the response rate, even though you can leave any question blank you want, is 98%. And on average, it takes people 6 minutes to complete, which means that 3,400 people who have participated so far have really sat down, seen the questions, answered the questions off the top of their head, and clicked submit. But what that means for us is, before we've even looked at a single medical record, which is hard and takes a lot of effort, we have pretty detailed information on over 3,000 patients. And if we were to try and do a study like this, even at Dana-Farber, where we have electronic medical records, it's actually really hard to get this degree of information, even these questions, for large numbers of patients. And so we start out with a very rich data set provided by the patients themselves. And what that means is, if we go back to this map and we start to say, well, what do we know about these 3,400 patients? We actually know a lot, and we can start to identify specific subgroups of patients that might be particularly important to study their tumors or their saliva samples. We can study patients who've had extraordinary responses to therapies to understand, is there anything specific about their tumors that made their tumors respond really well to certain therapies. We can study patients with resistance to therapies and understand if we can find out why some tumors become resistant. We can study patients who present with advanced disease or de novo metastatic breast cancer, those people who, when they are diagnosed with breast cancer, already have disease that's spread beyond the breast. We can study patients who are diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer at a young age, which is a smaller group of patients, but patients that often have very aggressive disease. And this gives us the opportunity to study underrepresented populations, particularly in research and genomic research like what we're talking about. There are a lot of disparities in who has been studied previously. The big studies that have been done and published often are not representative of different ethnic and ancestral groups that get breast cancer. It's often largely focused on Caucasian patients, and this is an opportunity to really make this a more representative study. So I'll show you a couple of examples of the patient-reported data. We asked patients whether they've been diagnosed with ER, PR, HER2 positive, triple negative disease, and whether they've been diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer. And you can see these are patients' responses, and it's really quite representative of what one would expect. And so we're really getting all types of breast cancer here. We asked patients when they were diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. And you can see in this group about 36% of our participants were diagnosed with de novo metastatic breast cancer, so metastatic breast cancer at the time they were diagnosed with breast cancer. And this gives us an opportunity to really study this subgroup of patients to understand, well, is there something different biologically about having breast cancer that starts as metastatic disease? One of the things we're really interested, as I mentioned, is studying metastatic breast cancer in young patients. And this is a study that Komen is helping to support, which is to really understand patients who are diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer before the age of 40. And you can see we already have almost 1,000 patients, actually at this point more than 1,000 patients who were diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer before the age of 40. And really trying to understand, is there something different about the biology in young people as compared to older people? And then I mentioned studying patients with exceptional responses. And so we asked, were you on any therapies for more than 2 years in the metastatic setting? Or did you have any therapies that had an extraordinary effect where your tumor shrank or disappeared completely? And hundreds of people have answered yes to these questions, but they've told us what specific drug they received. And so that means we can go and we can find these pockets of patients here who had extraordinary responses to a particular drug. 138 patients who had a really great response to a drug called Xeloda, or 100 patients who had a really great response to a platinum. And so we can look at those groups of patients and figure out, are there specific characteristics that are correlated with a really great response. You can also look at it in a different way, where we ask how long people have been living with metastatic breast cancer. And you can see there are over 150 people in our group who have been living with metastatic breast cancer for more than 10 years. And so what can we learn from those patients? Is there something about the treatments they've received or about their cancer that might give us a clue for how we can help other people live longer with metastatic breast cancer? As I said, we want this data to be useful for everyone, and so it's going to get deposited in a number of databases that are accessible for researchers to be able to look at this data and do their own research. So here are 3 databases that this is going to be deposited to, and all of the saliva DNA information as well as the tumor DNA information will be put in there and linked to the clinical data, and we'll update that information every 6 months or so. And our first data deposition will be in the first half of this year, so very soon, and updated regularly, so anyone can go in and look. The last piece I'll talk about is that we also now have the ability to study tumor samples from blood samples. And so this allows us to study things like tumor evolution and resistance to therapies. And we've put together a blood kit, which you can see here, which we're now sending to participants where they can take it to their local doctor or their nurse or phlebotomist, and next time they get a blood draw, we ask for a courtesy blood draw. So they get 1 extra tube of blood that they then drop back into this kit. This is the first patient who actually helped pilot this study, and she posted this on Facebook. It goes in the FedEx kit and it comes back to us. And that really will enable us to study things like resistance and evolution. I mentioned that we've been doing this in partnership with patients and patient advocates, and we really have an amazing network of patient advocacy partners. You can see here 25 groups with more signing up to help along the way, and including Komen. And really, I can't emphasize enough that patients and advocates have been involved from the very beginning, before this project even had a name, in conceiving and designing, implementing, testing, and refining with constant feedback about how to make this project better. And I'll just leave you with a perspective, the patient perspective on this project. At some point, maybe 6 months after we launched, we started seeing on Twitter and Facebook all of these patients who are participating in the project starting to post selfies with their saliva kits that say on the top, "Count me in." And we didn't ask anyone to do this, but this was just something that folks decided they wanted to do to try and help spread the word about this project. And it highlights to me how much this has become empowering for patients, but a way for patients to help accelerate research that's important to them. And I'll leave you with, I'm going to read these last 4 quotes. These are just 4 representative quotes from a much larger collection of things that people send us or by email or post on social media. So one of our patients said, "I want to live and watch my children grow up, but if I can't, then I want to leave a legacy and a cure. As someone who does not live near a research center and therefore cannot easily participate in trials, I finally feel like I can contribute. Amazing how happy that little box makes you feel. I felt like a 2-year-old. Let me help. I feel a sense of pride and belonging because of this." And finally, giving us hope for the future, and if not for some of us, for our families. So I'll stop there. I just want to thank lots of people who help work on this, in particular the 5 folks you see there in red who kind of run this project and drive it every day, and many of them are sitting in the back corner here. So if you'd like to talk to any of us after about the project, please do. And I'd like to thank all our advocacy partners and the many advocates and patients who helped make this happen, and of course all the participants, all the patients with metastatic breast cancer who are part of the study. Thanks very much.